the north, but some patchy fair weather cloud will bubble up. Dry day, light winds, some spells of sunshine, but cooler everywhere, particularly chilly down the eastern side of England and eastern Scotland. High pressure is going to get pushed away early next week. Signs of change. It's a strange sort of change, though. Some uncertainties, but some weather fronts bringing some rain to Scotland and Northern Ireland on Monday. And then we change the wind direction, draw down a northerly wind. It may get even colder. Bye for now.
The Prime Minister's Brexit divorce plan is rejected by Parliament yet again on the very day that the United Kingdom was supposed to leave the European Union.
The ayes to the right, 286. The noes to the left, 344.
Theresa May lost by 58 votes, the defeat narrower than last time, but still it is a major setback for her and for Brexit.
The implications of the House's decision are grave. The legal default now is that the United Kingdom is due to leave the European Union on the 12th of April, in just 14 days' time. That is not enough time to agree, legislate for and ratify a deal.
There has to be an alternative found. And if the Prime Minister can't accept that, then she must go, not at an indeterminate date in the future, but now, so that we can decide the future of this country through a general election.
Anger on the streets outside as thousands of pro-Brexit supporters descend on Westminster, shouting betrayal. And confusion, consternation and Brexit fatigue around the country will have reaction from voters as everyone wonders, what now?
As a person who voted to leave, very frustrated that my decision hasn't gone forward.
I really don't know where Parliament's going to go. I don't know where the government's leading. I don't think there's been leadership from the government right from the start.
Coming up on BBC News, players warn they will walk off if they suffer racist abuse as the Premier League returns after the international break.
Good evening from Westminster, where there are angry crowds on what should have been the day we left the European Union. Instead, in dramatic scenes this afternoon, MPs voted for the third time to reject the Prime Minister's Brexit divorce deal. MPs were told this was their last chance to deliver the kind of Brexit people voted for. But it wasn't enough to persuade them. 286 MPs voted yes, 344 voted now. The Prime Minister lost by 58 votes. Theresa May said it was a matter of deep personal regret that the UK wasn't leaving the EU today and called it a grave moment for Parliament. April the 12th is now Brexit Day. Either we leave with no deal or the Prime Minister asks Brussels for an extension. And it could be a long one. We may now have to fight the European elections too. It's not how the 29th of March was supposed to be. Our political editor Laura Kuenssberg reports on today's historic vote.
This really is such an iconic day. It is March the 29th.
What do you want? Brexit! What do you want? Now!
This is a great failure, but we are not leaving at 11 o'clock this evening.
Crowds on the march to push Parliament to get on with it.
It's a thoroughly bad idea and it deserves to be defeated today.
On the day that we were due to leave,
Shame on you! Shame on you!
MPs asked the question, back a deal they hate or a delay. Protests brought frustration to Parliament. The Prime Minister brought the deal that would divorce us from the EU to the Commons for judgment again.
The ayes to the right, 286. The noes to the left, 344.
A closer result than last time out, but a third defeat of nearly 60 votes for Theresa May's deal, still way off.
I fear we are reaching the limits of this process in this House. This House has rejected no deal. It has rejected no Brexit. On Wednesday, it rejected all the variations of the deal on the table. This government will continue to press the case for the orderly Brexit that the result of the referendum demands.
This deal now has to change. There has to be an alternative found. And if the Prime Minister can't accept that, then she must go, not at an indeterminate date in the future, but now.
She should now go, and we should be having a general election.
Open calls for her to quit growing in her party too.
There's only one thing the Prime Minister can do. Get us out on the 12th of April. Get our country back and deliver what we promised. Because if we don't, God help us.
Do you think that she should stay in her job?
No.
I think it was inevitable that what just happened was going to happen because Theresa May once again singularly failed to reach out to people.
The Cabinet's still trying to cling on.
We're going to have to think very hard over the next few hours how we respond to that, but this is a hugely disappointing result that's, to my mind, absolutely not in the national interest.
The Prime Minister's pitch earlier was this is the last chance to make sure we could leave the EU sometime soon.
It avoids a long extension which would at least delay and could destroy Brexit. I have said that I am prepared to leave this job earlier than I intended to secure the right outcome for our country. And when the division bell rings in a few moments' time, every one of us will have to look into our hearts and decide what is best for our constituents and our country.
This deal, even the half of it we have before us today, is bad for our democracy, bad for our economy and bad for this country, and I urge the House not to be cajoled on this third-time lucky strategy and vote it down today.
For weeks, exhausted ministers have only been able to stand back and watch on, while Brexiteers made this deal sound like the end of the world. But listen.
If we say we stand up for 17.4 million people, then we have to get those people what they asked for, is to leave the European Union, and this now is the only way.
And then another.
I will vote for the motion. The problem I have is that I cannot countenance an even longer extension, and I cannot countenance holding European elections in May.
And then another.
Most of us don't like the agreement, but it's a damn sight better than sticking two fingers up to the British public and say we can ignore you.
But a clutch of convinced Eurosceptics were firm.
We have capitulated. This is not compromise, Mr. Speaker. This has been capitulation.
And Theresa May's allies from Northern Ireland weren't budging.
Whatever means there are available to us should this agreement go through, we will continue to oppose it.
Many more were furious.
No, Mr. Speaker, we cannot allow the future of this country to be held to ransom by the never-ending internal Tory psychodrama and people who want to put their own jobs and ambitions before the jobs and ambitions of people in this country.
The rainbow of other parties were never going to say yes.
We've been ignored, silenced and sidelined. The futures of citizens across Scotland and the rest of the UK held to ransom by right-wing Brexiteers and the DUP.
This is nothing more than deceit, duplicity and deception from a government in desperation.
So what happens next? Well, tonight even members of the Cabinet aren't sure. If we know anything about Theresa May, it's not impossible that somehow she will come up with another way of trying to get her deal through again. But remember, MPs are working together behind the scenes to try to come up with a solution, probably a softer Brexit, that could find a majority in the House of Commons sometime soon. But in either case, it's likely the government will have to ask the EU for a longer extension with conditions attached. But they could say no, in which case we might leave the European Union without a deal in a couple of weeks. As they leave, on the day we were all meant to leave, the question of the country's departure from the EU is far from journey's end.
Well, Laura is with me now. We were supposed to be standing here just hours away from leaving the European Union. Now everyone's just wondering, what now?
That's right, Sophie. I mean, this has been an extraordinary kind of malfunction of the Prime Minister's plan, is that she failed once to get it through. Well, they thought they could have another go, and with a good chance. That failed. Now on the second and half attempt, that's gone down as well.
And quite understandably, you know, people everywhere, including in Westminster, including even in the cabinet, are tonight scratching their heads and thinking, how on earth are we going to get out of this hole? So there are a few clear options, at least. First off, the Prime Minister, I think if we know one thing about her, she's going to have another go somehow in the next couple of weeks to get her plan through the nooks and crannies of Parliament. Now, that may well backfire, but I'm pretty sure she'll try to find a way, even though it's been defeated again today. The second option, we know that MPs are busy working behind the scenes to try to find a majority in that place, probably for a softer kind of Brexit, a closer relationship with the EU than the one the Prime Minister has negotiated. That could find a majority and actually get through the House of Commons. Whatever happens, it's very likely that very soon the Prime Minister is going to have to go to Brussels or pick up the phone to Jean-Claude Juncker and say, we need more time. So whatever happens, a long delay is very much on the cards, unless the EU says no, which is possible. And in that case, we're leaving without a deal in a fortnight's time.
Laura Kuenssberg, thank you. Well, as Laura says, Parliament now has just 2 weeks until the 12th of April to find another way forward. So what on earth happens now? Our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, looks at the options.
This may have been Theresa May's last chance, and she came up short. By 58 votes, MPs voted down the divorce deal she thrashed out with the EU. Plenty of battles still to come before Brexit's ever settled. But if Mrs May even hoped to regain any control, that hope probably died today. How? Tory Brexiteer resistance mostly crumbled. They feared losing Brexit altogether. Big hitters like Boris Johnson, Dominic Raab, even Jacob Rees-Mogg, who said till today he'd oppose the deal so long as the Democratic Unionists did. But the hardcore stayed firm. The DUP held out, fearing Northern Ireland could be treated differently to the rest of the UK for the sake of avoiding a hard EU border with Ireland. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour MPs split. 5 reconciled to Brexit backed the deal. Most helped sink it. So now, who's in charge? MPs and cross-party factions are working on their own plans for Brexit. Former Cabinet Minister Oliver Letwin is one of those organising a series of votes for next week, hoping most MPs can agree on one. The options? A Brexit closer to the EU than Mrs May's deal, maybe under the same customs rules, maybe under EU single market rules, so free movement of people could continue, or maybe both. That's been compared to the old European common market. A new referendum is an option, maybe tied to whatever Brexit deal is chosen in the end. And some MPs who oppose leaving with no deal and believe Parliament would never allow it, prefer revoking Brexit, calling it off for now or for good. MPs could still take control, ordering the government by law to adopt the plan MPs choose. So Mrs May's next move, assuming she's around long enough, doing nothing's not an option. There'll have to be a Brexit plan made law by a withdrawal agreement bill. MPs could try to force their own plans into that bill. A softer Brexit may well have most support. Could any PM order Tory MPs and ministers how to vote or try? Government discipline has all but collapsed. The next EU summit is set for a week on Wednesday. The EU offered to delay Brexit till May the 22nd if the Prime Minister managed to get the terms of divorce through Parliament. She's failed, so the deadline is set for April the 12th. That's to allow the UK to avoid the European elections. Until there's a final agreement, a no-deal Brexit remains possible. The outcome many fear most, maybe by accident. But the EU may offer a much longer delay. What if MPs demand a new referendum? You thought Brexit was close to being settled? Think again. They say all political careers, all premierships end in failure. Most end in better shape than Theresa May's. She's on the verge of leaving number 10 with her authority shattered, the future of Brexit still in deep doubt, demands growing louder for a general election. It's fair to ask, could any leader have done much better? Either way, there's a long list of contenders keen to move into Downing Street and try.
John Pienaar there. So, EU leaders will meet again for an emergency summit on April the 10th to discuss what happens next. Will they grant the UK another extension? Will they insist we now fight the elections for the European Parliament? Uncharted waters indeed. Our Europe editor Katya Adler is in Brussels for us now. And the reaction there, Katya?
Well, Sophie, there was no great surprise here that Parliament once again rejected the withdrawal agreement. In fact, I describe the sense here as one of resignation and also defensiveness, the EU wanting to protect itself as much as possible from any future Brexit fallout. And you know that in the past in negotiations, the EU has used the threat of a no-deal Brexit as part of those negotiations. Now EU leaders think that it is an increasingly likely prospect. That's what we heard from Emmanuel Macron of France today. And that's why he and a number of EU leaders are now really questioning whether it makes sense to delay Brexit for that much longer. They look at all the divisions in Parliament, in government, in cabinet, and they wonder whether the UK will ever unite around Brexit. Now, this is not to say that if the Prime Minister comes to that emergency Brexit summit here on the 10th of April, the EU leaders would say no to a longer extension. But what it does mean is that when she leaves the room, there will be a very heated discussion amongst the 27 EU leaders as to whether to extend, how long for, and under what conditions. One thing, as you pointed out, that they are standing firm on is the idea that for a longer extension, the UK would have to take part in European parliamentary elections. Now, why is that? Is this because the EU just wants to make it more difficult for the UK? Well, not really. If we extend for longer, we remain an EU member for longer. And the legality of a newly elected European Parliament can be called into question if all EU members aren't represented in it. So it's messy and it's complicated, Sophie, and EU leaders say they'll be watching really closely on Monday those indicative votes in Parliament to see if there are any clues now as into which direction the UK is heading.
Katya Adler in Brussels, thank you. So that is the mood in Brussels. But what do people here in the UK, away from Westminster, think about the uncertainty now facing the Brexit process? The city of Leeds had one of the closest referendum results in the country, with just over 50% of voting to remain and just under 50% voting to leave. Our correspondent Sarah Campbell has been getting reaction from businesses and voters in the city.
The opportunity now is for us to embrace the certain legal right for an extension.
We will be taking a huge leap into the unknown.
Parliament's green benches are 200 miles from these greens in Leeds, but golfers here are well aware that what's said and done there matters here.
March 29th, was that in your calendar as the day that we were going to leave the EU and now we're not?
Absolutely, yeah.
So how are you feeling today?
Frustrated, as a person who voted to leave. Very frustrated that my decision hasn't gone forward.
And do you think it will, ever?
It's questionable now.
Yeah. And Naveen, if I can interrupt.
Hi.
Nearly. How are you feeling today? You voted Remain.
The vote has gone exactly what I expected. The government's in major issues here, turmoil, and I really don't know where this is going, but my gut feel the government will collapse.
Opinions on today's vote are split among the members. Enjoying a well-earned drink after their round, 2 Remainers and 2 Leavers, all wondering what happens next.
I really don't know where Parliament's going to go. I don't know where the government's leading. I don't think there's been leadership from the government right from the start.
I think our MPs have made a real bad job of this whole thing. The vote was to leave, and I think we should leave.
I'd do a no deal on the 12th of April.
That doesn't worry you?
That doesn't worry me.
Voters in Leeds were split down the middle in the 2016 referendum. Remain achieved 50.3% of the vote, Leave only very marginally behind at 49.7%. Almost all of this company's tiles come from Europe, and profit margins have been hit since the vote.
We do need clarity, because as a business, all we want is to move on, be positive about what's going to happen next. Nobody knows what's going to happen next, so that uncertainty that is out there in the marketplace is creating problems.
Today was to be the day the UK struck out from the European Union. Instead, Britain will be staying put, at least for now. Sarah Campbell, BBC News, Leeds.
Our business editor, Simon Jack, is with me now. Clarity, certainty, a decision, that's what business wanted. They certainly haven't got that, have they?
Let me run you through a list of reactions here. Devastated, say the manufacturing group Make UK. Spirit sapping limbo continues, says the Institute of Directors. Sick and tired, say the Federation of Small Business, where the decision on this is much more nuanced. I think they're sick and tired of firing off responses to a series of votes, a process that they looked at with frustration, anxiety, alarm, and now I sense a kind of weary despair. Now, the thing they're really afraid of is no deal, the bogeyman. Now, the European Commission has come out today and said that is now a likely outcome. However, the financial markets just don't believe that. The pound had a bit of a wobble today, but nowhere near what you would expect if you thought no deal was coming into force. Uninvestable, say it's the SMMT, and I think that's the point. The longer this drags on, the less investment we see in the UK, and we have seen from official figures just this morning, we've had the lowest investment by business in the economy since 2009. So it's not just press releases, it's showing up in the real world.
Simon Jack, thank you. Well, as the result of the vote became clear, there were angry boos from many in the crowd here. Large numbers of protesters from both sides descended on Westminster this afternoon to mark what should have been Brexit Day, including the March to Leave procession, which left Sunderland 2 weeks ago. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has spent the day with people at the protests and sent this report.
Brexit! Now! Let's get out! Let's have Brexit! Freedom!
Very, very sad. Very disappointed.
Democracy! Democracy! The deal's rubbish! It's not leaving!
I think it's an outrage. This is why I'm here.
They wanted it, voted for it, won it, but didn't get it.
Today was supposed to be Brexit Day. How do you sum up this day for you? How do you describe it?
It's a total and utter betrayal of democracy. Whether or not you voted Remain or Leave, it is pathetic.
We were supposed to be having a party tonight, instead we're having a wake. What our politicians are saying to us is, shut up and sit down.
Some on this Leavers March had walked from Sunderland, determined to tell Westminster just how let down they felt.
March the 29th was not supposed to look like this, not so much a celebration, but another demonstration. And amongst the Brexiteers, a real sense of anger.
This should have been an amazing day for England, yeah? But you've ruined it. They've ruined it.
When I voted, and when they triggered Article 50, I thought today would be the day.
Do you not think that actually the politicians who wanted to get out of Europe just should have accepted the deal and then you could have been celebrating
But
today?
the deal is not leaving. The deal is worse than remaining for Leavers.
Parliament Square and the roads around the Commons were full of thousands of Leavers. Just a handful of Remainers watched on.
I'm very glad that it's not Brexit Day, but I also think that it's a pity that things haven't progressed a little quicker. And you'd have thought that maybe by now that politicians could have sorted something out.
We personally voted Remain, but we just want it finished with now, even that means leaving.
Those who support leaving the most have resisted the deal the hardest. To them, the Prime Minister's Brexit did not mean Brexit. This was supposed to be the day. Who knows when it will come? Lucy Manning, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, that's all from Westminster for now. I'll be back later in the programme with more on this extraordinary day. Here, though, is Rita with the rest of today's news.
Sophie, thank you. The detective who led the investigation into Jill Dando's murder has told the BBC her case will never be solved. In a documentary to mark 20 years since the broadcaster was shot outside her home in Fulham, Hamish Campbell said he didn't think any new suspects would be brought to court. Barry George was jailed for the murder but was acquitted and released after a retrial. The struggling retailer Debenhams has agreed to a £200 million refinancing package with lenders to revive the business. The department store chain said the deal offered reassurance for employees, pension holders and suppliers. The company will continue with plans to close a number of stores. A new study says the current system of checking newborn babies in England for hip problems is failing, resulting in too many late diagnoses and corrective surgery. Only those at risk or with problems receive a scan, but the rate of late diagnosis hasn't improved since screening started over 30 years ago. Tributes have been paid to the members of the Liverpool-based indie band Hers, who've died in a car crash in the United States. Stephen Fitzpatrick and Auden Ladding were killed along with their tour manager Trevor Engelbrectson as they travelled from Arizona to a concert in California. Our correspondent Ashley John Baptiste reports.
24-year-old Stephen from Cumbria and 25-year-old Auden from Norway met in Liverpool as students. As music duo Hers, they were living most bands' dream, touring the US, playing live music for fans. Their record label said the duo, along with their tour manager Trevor Engelbrectson, were killed in a car crash in the early hours of Wednesday on an Arizona freeway whilst on their way to a gig in California. Since the news of the crash, tributes have been flooding in.
You could just see they were being themselves when they were on stage. They came alive. They were sweet, they were warm, they were infectious to be around. They were just the loveliest people. They really were truly talented.
Having released their debut album, they were recently interviewed by BBC Music during a festival in Texas.
We've been selling out shows on like the East Coast so far, which is it's been a really, really good run so far. We're excited.
Midway through a tour in North America, the band stood out as a promising talent whose potential was brutally cut short. Ashley John Baptiste, BBC News.
Let's return now to our main story and back to Sophie in Westminster. Sophie.
Rita, thank you. Well, let's get a final word now with our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. March the 29th, this is not how the Prime Minister wanted today to be. Where does this leave her now?
Well, for Theresa May, whether she likes it or not, her credibility, her authority is completely bound in and tied in with how she's getting on with her Brexit plan. And we've seen again today her attempts to get it through, her central mission, have just failed again. There have been so many miscalculations. Sure, she was dealt a very, very difficult hand with a divided party and no majority in the House of Commons. But even though I think she'll try to find a way of having it again, one senior Tory MP said to me about half an hour ago, she's finished. She doesn't have authority. So this deal that she put together so painstakingly with the European Union, she may well try to have another go. But even though she's already said she'll leave sooner than she planned, there are more Tory MPs already saying tonight she should quit and quit now. But it's such a time of uncertainty. We think she's going to add to that by willingly walking out of Downing Street? I don't think so.
Our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, thank you very much. Let's have a look at the weather now with Darren Bett. Darren.
Thanks very much, Sophie. We took the temperature of the country today, and whilst it was 18 degrees in London, here in Sheffield in South Yorkshire, it was 19 Celsius this afternoon. Things will change this weekend. Instead of those gentle and warm southwesterlies, we've got colder air that's going to come plunging down across the whole of the country. So much so that by Sunday, a typical afternoon temperature could be 10 degrees. Some places maybe a little bit warmer, some places will be a little bit colder. Now, the really cold air is just waiting to come in. It's actually to the north of this band of thicker cloud here. That's been producing a bit of rain and drizzle in the northwest of Scotland. And that thicker cloud and patchy rain and drizzle will head further south into Scotland, eventually into Northern Ireland. South of that, England and Wales, clear skies, light winds, tumbling temperatures, a bit more mist and fog around, especially for Wales and western parts of England, where again, in some rural areas, those temperatures may get close to freezing. Tomorrow, the mist and fog shouldn't last too long, and we should see some decent spells of sunshine arriving. But that band of thicker cloud, increasingly light and patchy rain, continues southwards away from Scotland and Northern Ireland, where we get some sunshine, into northern England, eventually into North Wales. Behind that, to the north, even with some sunshine, a few showers in the north of Scotland, temperatures are struggling into double figures. The warmth is getting squeezed to the southeast, 18 or 19 degrees here. Saturday night into Sunday morning, we have an hour less in bed. The clocks spring forward into British summertime, but ironically, it'll feel a bit colder. There'll be more cloud for southern parts of England and Wales. It's probably going to be a dry day. Chilly start further north. We'll see some patchy cloud bubbling up, but a dry day with light winds and some spells of sunshine, but cooler everywhere. Only 7 or 8 degrees eastern Scotland and some eastern parts of England. Back to you, Sophie.
Darren, thank you. A reminder now of our main story this evening. The Prime Minister's Brexit divorce plan is rejected by Parliament yet again on the very day that the United Kingdom was supposed to leave the European Union. That's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.